Hello and welcome to Particular. And today I'm joined by Julia, and she's my best friend, and also she's a professional journalist. So
Hello.
basically, I had an interest of inviting her because I really want our episodes to be structured and have like a professional view, and also more the merrier. So I think this could be a great collaboration. And yeah, Julia,
Hello.
how
Hello.
was your
Yes.
week?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be your co-host. Um, it's really flattering. And thank you for letting me sing a little jingle in the beginning. Well, I'm very excited about this because I think you found a really good topic for a whole series of podcasts because creatives want to talk about themselves and how they create and how we work, how we think, because it's a lot of thinking. Sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's just unbearable, and we have to talk to each other. Sorry, I'm getting philosophical here. But anyway, I have a background. I have a background in journalism. I'm in digital video by trade. I've made a few documentaries, and I'm very happy doing any type of interview. I love asking questions. I love listening, and that's what we'll do. What I liked about this episode and how Nick was talking about the creative block in particular is that he was not afraid of being vulnerable. So he shared some of the things that are not very common for people to admit to, and he just admitted that he felt some feelings, and or that he was not doing a thing that everybody's doing. So that felt really genuine and helpful as well, and relatable.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you used the phrase in particular, which really reflects the name of our podcast. So, yeah, without further ado, please listen to our conversation with Nick Howard. And yeah, thank you for listening. Nick, thank you for coming to our podcast. It's a pleasure. And basically, I thought it would be a good idea to start just asking everyone how's everyone's week. So yeah, Nick, how was your week? What you were up to, and also how would you rate your creativity for the past week from 1 to 10?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on here. Podcasts are, you know, a lot of fun. I haven't done many of them, but I'm definitely a podcast abuser in some way. Like I've been binging podcasts and yeah, I really enjoy them. This week's been good. It's the start of the week, obviously. Today was a little rocky. I've got a 5 month old. I'm actually in her nursery right now. This is a mobile above me, but she woke up at 4:30 this morning. So I've been up for quite some time. But the start of the week's good. I'm about to kick off a big production. Gonna make a fun thing, which we can talk about later. So even though I'm a little bit tired, the week's heading in a good direction. I'm talking about making things. That's kind of my happy place. And then as far as creativity, I've never thought about it that way. Like I've never thought like, oh, how creative am I today? You know what I mean? Like I usually think of like my sleep meter as something that can go up and down, but my creative meter, I don't know if I think about it as like a battery that, sometimes is full, sometimes is low. But yeah, with a production on the horizon, this is usually when I'm firing on all cylinders. I really love coming up with ideas and obviously, sharing those with people and trying new things. But that part of the process, I think in any creative industry can be, it's just a bit laborious. That's the part of a job that kind of feels like a job, where when you're making stuff, that's usually when I feel the most creative and the most free because it's just, I don't know, it feels like you're working with your hands versus trying to convince people that something is good. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Totally agree. But yeah, just a quick one before we go on to our main topic. I'm just curious, what, like, how does your everyday day look like in terms of like, what do you do to ignite this creativity to start your day? Maybe you like, I don't know, check some resources, or I don't know, you go for a walk. Maybe you can share some tips on that.
sure, yeah, I know some people have routines that sort of get them into the mindset. I do not as of late. My routine is waking up at 4:30 with my daughter and taking her to school, so it's maybe a bit more maybe on the boring side. But recently, I kind of will use that as my example because she's 5 months old now, and I don't know if you two have kids or if you know people with little kids, but they sort of become sentient at at 5 months, which is like a weird thing to say, but they start to understand the world that's around them. She's learning how to laugh. So any routine that I had before her, usually included walking my dog or going on a bike ride or skateboarding, usually just getting outside. It's part of what I love about living in Portland, Oregon. You can go out in the woods and sort of breathe a new air. But with having a daughter now, she's actually a big kind of creative unlocker because I'm kind of re-experiencing emotions I haven't in a long time. She's giggling at funny things. She's giggling at things that aren't funny. Um, she's grabbing my mustache and exploring it with her hand and not sure what it is. So it's really simple, but she like is kind of reminding me that, life is weird and fun to look at, fun to laugh at, fun to touch.
I can relate. Yeah, I have a daughter. She's 9. So it's very far from 5 months old. But definitely, I agree with you on the fact that it re restarts your kind of your feeling of the world around you. But you were talking about emotions, that you
Yeah.
rediscovered some emotions. What are the emotions? What are the feelings?
Um, well, when you sort of like put your head down and start working, um, even though we're in the creative business where we're kind of in the business of emotions, you tend to get like a little hard-nosed about stuff, or at least I do. I get a little bit like serious and I take my job pretty seriously and I work really hard and I'm competitive with it. So you kind of forget to like take a minute and like laugh, or take a minute and feel something. Like just yesterday morning, it was Sunday morning at 8, and I was watching a movie on the couch, and she woke up, and so I wanted to keep watching the movie, so I just plopped her down next to me, and she has no idea what's going on, but she was enthralled with the movie. I was watching Avatar, The Way of Water, which beautiful movie, not a very good story, but beautiful movie. Um, and she was fascinated with it. So I think it's every emotion. She's laughing and she's kind of in awe of stuff, which is that's sort of the business, I think. That's like,
But she's also a massive distraction, I imagine. So how do you cope with that? Actually, that relates to creative blocks and just not being able to focus on something. It's very hard to focus when you have such a small child in the house. How do you feel about that?
yeah, it's incredibly hard. Anybody who's busy, you don't have to have a kid to understand what it's like to be busy and your kind of brain is pulled in a lot of different ways. And that's tough. I mean, I know some creative people who, are specialists really need their time to do nothing. And sometimes you can have the best ideas by forgetting about what you're supposed to be doing for a day. Um, but when you're busy, when you have a kid and there is no time My brain's sort of rewired recently, because it had to, which has been cool. And I'm sort of having an out of body experience watching myself turn into a new person a bit. Because before my superpower was being able to outwork other people, like just work really, really hard. Where now I don't have that luxury anymore. So, um, what I'm finding is with like limited time, I just have a stronger gut, I think. Or maybe I always had a gut, but now I just hear it and listen to it and like grab onto it immediately versus interrogating it too much. So I don't overthink as much, which is nice.
I just wanted to like gently move us into the direction of our topic, and but it's connected to what you just said, Nick. Um, with the focus and like being, like trying to be attentive to a lot of things happening around you. It also
Hmm.
can happen in our industry in terms of, having people do a lot of things, like your colleagues, a lot of trends happening, everything. And sometimes, as for me, I feel really overwhelmed by it. And I feel like, oh, I'm not doing anything. And then the creative block hits me. So have you ever experienced either that kind of experience or creative block? And like, how would you describe it for yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, having access to everything, the internet, is a blessing and a curse because I know what you mean when you say it's just kind of overwhelming. Like comparison culture is really tough. When you see how much other people are making, when you see people who are really prolific, and it can become so overwhelming where it feels defeating a little bit, where, you're just watching because you get the highlight reels from everybody. And when you get the highlight reel from the most successful people in the world, it's like, man, they did that by what age? Like, oh my gosh. Like they did how many projects that were all amazing and famous in the last year? It's tough. I came from sports world, so, comparison has always been, I think, a weakness of mine. Sometimes I can use it as a strength, but comparing yourself to other people, that phrase, comparison is the thief of joy, it's really true, but it's also a really good motivator. So creative block, I don't necessarily um, relate to that as much as other people, just because I don't find myself like terribly creative. I'm in a creative industry and I make creative things, uh, but I kind of just feel like I'm solving problems most of the time, and I get to work with really creative people. So I try to have, novel ideas, and try to do things I've never done before. But usually the people that I work with are 10 times more creative than I am. And I kind of provide us a general direction of where we should go. But then I like to let them lead in their departments because I'm not an animator. I hired an amazing animator to do the animating. I hired an amazing director. I like partnering with people who are much better than me. So creative block isn't something that I feel a lot. But it might be kind of circling back to my original point. It might just be because I compare myself to others quite frequently, and that becomes a serious, serious motivator. Um, so the busier I am, usually the more prolific I am, the more creative I am, the more things I can handle. It's when I have those moments of downtime, um, and I'm free to do whatever I want. Those are usually the times when I have creative block, if I have it at all, because I'm not able to pull from anything. I'm just sort of looking at the blank space around me and unsure what to do with it.
I recently, Julia recommended this book actually. It was about, it's called Stolen Focus. And basically, in this book, like the author suggests that, yeah, we live in a world like where we are overwhelmed by all kinds of information. And basically, when we even go for a walk, we can't go in silence. We need to fill our space with
You need
podcasts,
to listen to a
music.
podcast.
Yeah, which is a good thing for podcasters, but at the same time, it's not really good for your not only mental health, but I mean like in terms of changing your perspective. So we kind of want to fill this, space all the time with all kinds of information. So I wanted like to challenge you a little bit. So do you think being in this constant competitive mode, in this constant, race, does it really like help you in the long run, or do you need like does it only work like for shorter periods of time?
I appreciate that challenge because it's the latter. Your instinct is definitely right. It's definitely a short-term thing. Um, and for for my career thus far, that's been pretty good, pretty fruitful. Kind of operating the short term and just looking at what's ahead of me. But it's definitely something that doesn't allow you to, you know, look 5 years ahead. And the motif that I'll probably keep using in this episode is my daughter. And like, perspective changes are really important. And at the moment, that's mine. And she's sort of, for the first time in my life, forced me to look quite further as opposed to what's, going to happen in the next 6 months. So you're totally right that like, comparison and motivators are a short-term thing, which, is fun too, because if you're kind of like me, I I hyperfixate on something for 6 months, whatever it is, a hobby or a project, and I go really deep on it, and then I throw it away, and then I move on to the next thing. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. What about you, Julia?
I cannot be honest. I'm quite different. I'm not. Um, I cannot hyper fixate on something. It's all with journalistic background, you have to be more like everything, and you're ready to talk about everything all the time, and kind of superficially be aware of all the topics. So it's all about scanning the landscape, the media and sort of informational landscape, and just being aware all the time. So you can't hyperfixate. You will lose the train of thought. But yeah, but that is no better than hyperfixation, I guess. It's just different um, extremum of the same problem, I guess. Well, you were talking about how you don't get a creative block, which I find fascinating. Well done. I'm really envious. But when you had one, and you said you had some downtime, could you describe that? What was it specifically, and how did you feel, and what did you do, and why? Did you understand it was a creative block at the time? What was the situation?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, I'll kind of take it back a little bit. Usually I think my thoughts out loud and kind of land the plane as I'm flying it. But so recently, my job, which is also my hobby, which is my life, which is, kind of everything. Only in the past couple of years I've had the luxury of like working with, you know, other people, really people who are amazing at their craft. But when I first started in the industry, I had to do everything. And I thought I was going to be a designer. And so in order to become a designer, I ingested a lot of design work. I just kind of looked at a lot of stuff and figured out how to copy it. Because I basically saw it all and I was like, okay, this is the bar out there. I'm going to reverse engineer it, figure out how they did it, and then hopefully try and do it a little bit better. And so that's how I taught myself. And, um, I was just kind of copying for a long time. And then now I get to work with other people, but every now and then I have to start, from a blank page and still design something or still art direct something. And I'm an art director by trade with, a passion for design. But the hardest briefs for me, I'm in advertising. The hardest briefs for me are print ads, um, which are like an art director's dream. Um, and some people specialize in them, but it's so terribly difficult to look at a blank page and try and figure out like, okay, visually, I'm gonna capture a moment in time and tell this story in this way. And it's really frustrating. And so usually what happens, I don't get print ad briefs very often. Nobody does anymore. Um, but that idea of coming up with a single image to communicate something happens all the time. I have to do that in presentation decks. Even if I have a big idea, a big campaign, it still needs, a single image that will get people's attention, right? Everybody does that. Even the podcast needs, its own image that people are going to attribute to it. Um, but whenever I have to do that, I usually do everything but. And so I've learned to kind of forget about it, and give myself a break. And what I say to my partner too, he's the writer. His name's Nick Stoner, so we both are named Nick. Um, but I usually say, just write into it. Don't write the title of the script. You'll figure out what the title is after you write the script. And for me, I don't figure out the print ad. I figure out everything else. And then once I have a lot to look at, kind of as a creative director, you can just look at it all. And it's pretty easy because you're just able to see everything on a wall and be like, well, that's the thing I keep paying attention to. And that's the one I keep going back to. And that's probably the idea. So that should probably be the print ad. That's probably the image. That's probably the title. And that's probably the idea. And so whenever you have creative block, like try to do not what you're supposed to do. Do everything else. And then you'll probably find what you're supposed to do by doing everything else.
That's a very good tip. Thank you. Well, about Nick, your co-creative, right? I was actually going to ask about him. And my question is, I guess, how is it different? Well, you described how you tell him um, to write everything else except for the title. So I assume he has creative blocks sometimes, and you are the one to notice that and help him. And how do you figure it out as a creative pair? How do you support a person who you see is having a creative block?
Yeah, I mean, supporting a person who has a creative block. You kind of answered it in the question. Um, the best thing for creative block is people. And it's really amazing having a partner because you have two brains. Anytime yours isn't working at 100%, there's a good chance, or at least a better chance, that theirs is, or maybe the combination of two brains at 50% equals 100%, anytime you have creative block, usually talk to someone. I've had a lot of really great mentors in my career. I would love to have better relationships with them and be able to call them. They're all, um, great people in advertising with important jobs. So I usually don't bother them with my little my little things. But if you have people who, whether they work in your business or not, you find are very creative, very sharp, just keep them close because anytime you're coming up empty on something, or you're just not sure maybe if this is provocative in the right way, or if this idea it's going to resonate with anybody, just find, a little group of five or something, people in your network, and start to cultivate that relationship as like a safe place, um, somewhere where no judgment, and you basically, you know, will work the same way that Nick and I work together. We kind of, there's no judgment whenever we're talking, because we always have bad ideas, but it's super, super helpful just anytime you're stuck or don't know to just bounce off of someone else, because even if they don't know, just in talking, you'll probably get somewhere.
Have you ever been stuck together? Like both of you don't know what to do.
Yeah, then we go play golf. We both are terrible golfers. But then, yeah, then usually 4 hours outdoors in the silence. Um, Usually that helps.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, like, what comes next? So basically, you have a creative block. You like do some things like to get rid of it, and then you have to re-enter the projects that you need to do. For example, or re-enter the industry, depends on how long your creative block is. So how would you say you would fight this fear of starting again, even if it was from like a short break, but you just like were not feeling creative enough?
Yeah, the fear is usually the problem. Whenever you have fear of starting something, you're gonna spend so much more time trying to start it. And so I've learned to sort of like deal with that fear and anxiety in a healthy way. I feel like every creative has some sort of relationship with their own anxiety, and it's it's useful if you can recognize it, because if it's there, you need to step away. Um, like maybe some people can fight through it and get there, but it's going to be really arduous. You're going to be pretty unhappy with whatever result you come up with it in that moment. Um, and I hate to say that, like just forget about it for 3 days, because not everybody has that luxury. But if you can forget about it for a little bit, it is true that, it might not come to you in the shower, but it'll probably come to you in some way somewhere. Um, and whenever you like just step away for a minute and it finally clicks, again, like people think of that as a cliche. It's like, oh, creatives have the eureka moment. It's not a eureka moment. You just like get a minute to relax, and you get a minute to think logically, as opposed to being stressed on a deadline and pushing yourself too hard. Because once you have it, I guarantee whatever you have to make or whatever you have to write, you can write it in 30 seconds. But if you're struggling and you feel blocked, that'll take 30 days. And it's such a difference. Like when you have a great idea and you're ready and you're excited, you go at it and you're fast and you're sharp, versus, kind of trudging through and like being upset and like second guessing, you're typing out a sentence and then deleting it.
Have you found a way to communicate this to the client or the managers? Anybody who is actually on a schedule and saying, we need it tomorrow, and whatever you do with yourself. Have you found a good way of communicating that? Because the message is important.
No, 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 no. If anybody has, a way to make timelines go away, please. I mean, you don't need to tell me. You could write a book and probably win the Pulitzer Prize if you do that. Um, no, yeah, you ask nicely. But I mean, sometimes you don't need it. Other times you have really, really long timelines. And it's a trade-off. I'll trade you, 2 days on this project, because the next project, if I have a month, who knows? Like I might be able to do it in a day. It's, you know, I think that's just a story of partnership. And if you're working with people who respect you and you respect them and you are partners as opposed to vendors, um, usually those things all come out in the wash anyways, because what's a day or a day or two when, the product is better.
I see like there is a certain correlation between, like you mentioned, you did competitive sport, and I think one of the major things in sport is recovery. So is it the same with creativity? Like, do you need to recover from it how do you recover if you do? I mean, like with sport it's sleep and like some resting and like doing some physio, for example, but like what is it with creative? Because it's creativity is also a muscle, if we can say, like, in a way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about it that way. Like I need to like rest my brain. Um, you do get exhausted though, and it's a physical thing. Whether it's because you are standing on your feet on set for a 14-hour shoot day, or because me, an art director, just had to read 31 pages of screenplay from my copywriter. Like I'm exhausted. Um, so you definitely need a break. Luckily, with creative stuff, it's usually not physically taxing. It's just sort of emotionally, it takes a toll on your brain. So, I kind of the opposite, where in sports you need to rest. Usually, when I'm creatively exhausted, I need to exercise. And I don't work out, or anything like that. But like, I mean, I do work out, but like, I'm not like a gym guy. Like, oh, I need to go lift weights. I just mean like whether it's a walk or something, usually a little bit of sweat um, does a lot of good for your brain, and however you want to do that, that's good. I know some people recharge with like reading a book, but if I've just spent a lot of time thinking really hard about something, I need to use the different part of my brain, which usually sport takes care of. It's more instinctual versus critical.
Just before we move, I just wanted to like quickly touch on that you mentioned instinctual in terms of sport. Do you think creativity can also become instinctual at some point when you like, advance it at some level, or is it always a very conscious process? Like you always need to be like in the zone. It's not something you can train and never forget.
I think creativity can totally be instinctual. I think it is, and it always is. It's just a matter of how much you trust yourself to let it be instinctual. Um, I want to give a shout out to your previous guest who was the snowboarder, because she said something that I really resonated with. She was like, "I'm too artsy for the sports world, but I'm too athletic for the arts world." And so that's where I've always been. I've been like sort of in that middle. And so, I don't necessarily think that what I'm about to say, or like my experience relates to everyone, of course. But being in between arts and sports, it's always been instinctual for me. And the quicker you can become trusting of yourself, the better your creative output will be, because everybody has a gut. Everybody has a gut feeling. And creative is one of those things. It's not math. You don't know there's a universal right answer, but there usually is a right answer. There's probably several right answers, but you yourself will feel something weird when it's the right answer. Um, Usually for me, it's a bit of nervousness. And that's something that, I've learned is actually a good feeling. When I was younger and I had a lot of bosses and wasn't, as far along in my career, I got nervous about that nervous feeling and usually shied away from it and watered down whatever I was about to do until I was comfortable. But recently I've realized that's actually my most powerful thing, is realizing when I feel nervous is usually because we're onto something good. And it goes back to, you know, growing up skateboarding and snowboarding. Uh, Whenever I was about to try a new trick I hadn't done before, I was fucking scared. I was super nervous because bad stuff could happen. Um, but then when you landed that trick for the first time, it was the best drug in the world. And, you know, maybe I'm nerdy and I really love this job, but like when you do something you haven't done before creatively, it's the best feeling in the world. And it's the same.
Yeah, totally. I can relate, but um, I will try to challenge you again. So I think with being instinctive and like, trusting your gut, where is this borderline when it becomes being on the auto mode? So, like, for example, you know that you're a good creative, you know that you can do stuff, and like anything you'll do, it will be like of a certain level. And at some point, I can notice like some creatives, they do stuff on auto, they still like they do trust their gut, but still they're not that, conscious and in the moment. So how will, like, for yourself, do you distinguish those two modes of you just following your gut and being like in the creative, or just being like on auto because you can do it good?
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. I think auto, like auto mode, autopilot, all that sort of stuff is good for planes, but bad for creatives. It's if you if you're doing creative things and you find yourself bored, you're usually on autopilot. And that's what they, say going through the motions, right? You're just kind of doing it. And selfishly, every project that I get, um, this is different when you're a manager, of course, but like as a creative person, every project that I get, I try to do something I haven't done before, because then I'm fully engaged the whole time. I'm learning. I'm able to, even if it doesn't go well, I'm able to look back and be proud that I tried something new, or at least take something from the experience that I can apply later. Um, but whenever I feel like I'm bored and I like have a moment to reflect and I'm like, man, why is this not, why am I not enjoying this right now? That's silly. We should be enjoying this. It's usually because you're on auto mode and you're doing something that you've already done. And I know there are specialists in every discipline who get really, really good at one thing and continue to get better and better at that one thing, but that's just not me. I thought I was at some point, I thought I was going to be a drummer. Then I thought I was going to be a piano player. Then I thought I was going to be a guitar player. Then I thought I was going to be a snowboarder. And then I thought I was going to be an astronaut. And then I thought I was going to be a dentist. And hopefully you're sensing the pattern here. Um, I thought I was going to be a billion things and specialize in them until I found the next one. And I find it, a really fun way to experience the world.
But doesn't it give you a feeling that you're not good at anything?
Yes, it does. But the phrase is, let me get it right. A jack of all trades is a master of none. It's something like this. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but still better than a master of one. Um, the phrase is like everyone shares just the first bit, but they forget the end of it, better than a master of one. And that's my perspective. I hire a lot of people and I get to work and partner with a lot of people who are masters of their trade. And I really respect those people because it's just you know, it's a, it's something that I can't do. Um, I don't know how they do it, but it's beautiful. I was just watching a video of a cathedral stonemason, and he's incredible at carving stone. And I could never devote that much energy to one thing, but it was beautiful to watch.
When did you accept that in yourself, and how did that happen? Because obviously there is, I can feel there is a lot of thought and sort of background work in what you're saying now. How did you accept that?
And you guys ask really good questions. You should be like therapists or something. uh, I accepted it once I realized I didn't have a choice. Um, once I sort of took stock of all the hobbies and things that I've gotten pretty good at and then left behind to explore a new one, I realized that that's kind of who I was. And it wasn't too long ago. I went through a lot of life actually being pretty disappointed in myself that I was sort of a Swiss Army knife creative. Like, oh man, I really don't have a voice. And then, well, actually, I do have a moment. This is kind of kind of nerdy, but my job made me take this aptitude test. It's sort of like a leadership test that tells you what kind of personality you are. It's called the DISC test, DISC. Um, I'm sure creative people don't like it, but it gives you like you're a dominant personality, or you're a relationship building type of personality, or you're a quiet personality, or you're a person who likes the details, and it sort of maps you. Um, and my results, I was like 0.01% of the population. And they made an example of me because I was right in the middle and I flexed to all of them. And she's like, "This is really unusual. You're kind of a chameleon. Like, do you find yourself adopting the personalities of those around you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." And then once I realized that was unique, I realized that was my superpower.
Yeah, now moving to our next topic, I just wanted to ask you, yeah, coming back like to the styles and like finding your own style. Would you highlight like just for our listeners? Can you highlight two projects that you're really like proud of, but they have to be like on separate, like I don't know if we imagine a line like on separate poles, basically.
Mm.
So and if you could tell a little bit about them so that we, you know, have an understanding of how various your style is.
Yes, I can do that. I'll use two projects for the same brand actually, which might be more interesting too. Because people, when they think of a brand, they want like a brand to have a voice, right? They want a brand to sort of be a personality. But I think modern brands can have a lot of voices. I think it's a really human way um, to be a brand, to just do a lot of different things. So for a while, I worked on Miller Lite, you know, the original fine Pilsner. It's American beer. It's been around forever. I actually grew up drinking it. I'm from, you know, the Midwest, and Miller Lite's a Midwestern brand. But the two projects that I'll kind of dive into, one is called Farewell Work Holiday Parties, and another is called The Shoesy. And I think they couldn't be more different from themselves in terms of execution and an idea. But what they both do is they just communicate that Miller Lite is a comfortable beer to drink. It's a unpretentious beer. It's not trying to be fancy. It's when you drink Miller Lite, or when you think of the brand of Miller Lite, you would be happy drinking it with, you know, anybody, your closest friends, because you're not trying to be something you're not when you're holding a Miller Lite. Brands tend to be an accessory and they communicate something about you, where Miller Lite's sort of like a white t-shirt. It's anything. So the Shoesy is a really easy one to explain. For Father's Day, we got a brief. They just wanted to make the brand famous for Father's Day. And Miller Lite has a cultural sort of story around them, that they're your dad's beer. Like it wasn't cool to drink it. And we're like, you guys should really own that. It's a beautiful thing for people to tell a story about you. And so we partnered with the dad shoe, which is the New Balance white trainer. It's like the quintessential shoe that Midwestern suburban dads. And so we just did a partnership that was like something really funny that dads would have made themselves. You know, they would have crafted a shoe for their beer, made a fancy koozie. So the Shoesy was born. It was a New Balance times Miller Lite beer koozie that kept your beer cold, but it was fashioned from the New Balance dad shoe. And it didn't win any advertising awards or anything like that, but it went insanely viral. The most viral campaign I've probably ever worked on. It got picked up in China and Russia and Thailand and all over the place. It was really something special to see that travel. But so that one, you know, was just a fun, quirky little product. And then on the other side, Farewell Work Holiday Parties was very much an art project. We actually got into the Museum of Modern Art. Not the Museum of Modern Art, sorry, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA. which is another amazing, modern art museum. But that one, the story was during the holidays, everybody drinks pretentious cocktails. So Miller Lite doesn't really have a place um, in the holidays. And so with COVID happening, we're like, oh man, nobody's going to go to work parties anymore. But maybe that's a good thing because those things are stiff and awful to go to. So maybe this means more time with your real friends. Maybe we should make a memorial for work parties and say goodbye to them forever as a celebration of being able to drink beer at home with your real friends during the holidays instead of work parties. So we made this crazy sculpture with Alex Prager, an amazing photographer, and it was crafted so well that the curators at the museum wanted to feature it. And you'd have to go look at them because visually they couldn't be more different, but they eventually tell the same story of the brand.
Yeah, that's like totally, completely like two different types of projects on the spectrum, as I would say. But I also feel like when you approach this kind of projects, it's really, sometimes hard to, I don't know, follow the brand guidelines. And like, it's really cool when the brand is very, brave to, accept the challenge and do stuff. So, can you tell a little bit about how you approach this idea to the client? Because, like, for me, it's always very interesting. How do you pitch it and what the client says? Because for them, it might be like something new and something challenging.
Yeah, sure. Which of the two would you like me to talk about?
I like the one with the shoes,
Shoesies, yes,
the
my
New
voice
Balance
goes
one.
to shoesies.
Yeah.
The shoesies. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that one was tough because for as long as I had worked on Miller Lite, they really didn't want to talk about the fact that they're known culturally as your dad's beer. Um, they worked really hard to try and be the opposite and make themselves attractive to a younger audience, right? So it's kind of saying like, hey, you know that thing that you guys think is your worst attribute? What if we made a campaign about that? And a lot of clients would close the door in your face. But our clients we had such a good relationship with them. And that's sort of what I was saying earlier. When you get to a point when you're partners with someone, like truly partners, you can talk about anything with no judgment. And so we wouldn't have made that in the first year of our relationship with the client and agency. It took 3 years of building trust, 3 years of grinding it out on projects together and understanding each other and realizing that we're both after the same thing. We're both after success for the brand. Nobody's trying to pull a fast one on you. So I say that to say that like you need to have patience. Sometimes, you might I might have had that idea the first month I worked on the brand, but it wouldn't have worked. Nobody would have said yes to it because nobody would know who I am. And so you really need to have patience and you need to kind of prove it to the people that you're working with. And eventually, maybe it doesn't need to take 3 or 4 years, but sometimes once you build a little bit of trust, then you can talk about the ugly stuff and maybe turn it into a positive. And I mean, the proof is in that campaign. It wasn't a bad thing about the brand. It was probably their most viral moment ever because everybody saw it and were like, oh my God, that's so true. That's so funny. They casted, dads from Home Depot. That's like so authentic. It's so Miller Lite. There's no artifice around it. It's just a beautifully fun thing that's right for Miller Lite and New Balance, and people celebrated it because of that. So, you know, whenever you go into a client pitch, you can usually smell if somebody's trying to pull a fast one or lying a little bit. And, my advice is to never do that. Always be authentic, be honest, and hopefully people trust you.
Well, also lots of dads are millennials. I mean, a lot of millennials are dads now, including yourself. So it's kind of a completely different culture. Did you mention that was that a part of your presentation to the client, or did you not play on that?
I'm sensing the journalist background here, Julia. That's another really good question because I definitely put that in the presentation. Um, dad core, dad fashion is obvious. No, everybody knows it's having a moment. It's almost like played out now. It's had its moment for so long, but yeah, that was a big part of it. It was like, not only is this a true thing, it's also like the most hottest thing in fashion right now to dress like your dad. So you're going to be hitting a lot of points. But I was really proud of that we didn't do like, we didn't cast millennials sort of pantomiming as dads or cast young fashionable people. We stayed true, and cast like 55-year-old
To the
dads that
original.
we literally found at Home Depot. They weren't actors. Yeah. Um, so yeah, dad fashion definitely helped us sell that through.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. We had this question planned as a completely separate topic, but I know for sure that I just can't not ask you that. It's coming from me. I'm always very overwhelmed by feeling that everything has already been created. You can't be
Mm.
original. There's nothing else new you can create. Everywhere, like every idea you get, you Google something, oh, something similar just happened, or just like something similar was created. Are you ever frightened by that? And what do you do if you feel like, oh, I feel like I can't create something original? So do you think it's a bad thing? Or is it still good to, kind of be inspired by others' work?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. We could do like a whole 5-hour podcast about that. It's
Yeah.
seriously because there's so many tentacles to that question. Everything has been created, but also like nothing has been created yet. The one thing that uh, I don't love about the moment in culture that we're in right now is that it's very much remix culture. Um, and like AI is a perfect, you know,
Yeah.
visual articulation of that. AI can't create anything new. It's just copying and remixing things that it can find on the internet. And that's sort of the biggest downfall. It can't create anything new. But even before AI became really popular, everything sort of felt like a remix of something else. Um, but once you realize that that's always been the case, it tends to relax you a little bit. Um, Everything has always been a remix or a reference of something else, like way, way back to Renaissance paintings, like the David sculpture, the Mona Lisa, like way back to original artwork. It's always been a remix of some degree. And music is probably the easiest way to see that. Like, there's only so many notes, yet we still have a million new songs written every day. That's crazy, you know? And it's okay to reference other things. Like people like that. Um, you don't need to be so blatant as to copy it. But
Yeah.
usually if you're referencing something, um, that's just that's just a synonym for relatable. Um, you know what I mean? Like a reference takes a lot of shapes and sizes, and it's just all that means is it's something that we can agree on. Um, and things that are totally new, um, I'm not sure they exist.
Just to kind of sum up our episode, I wanted to ask you, Nick, if you could. We want to introduce this kind of way of ending our podcast with giving something like to our listeners to read, to watch, or to be inspired by something. So
Hmm.
if you could name one book, one film, and one creative campaign that you want to recommend right now, what would it be?
Cool. Um, yeah, I kind of hate myself for doing this, but the film I'm going to recommend is a film that I made because I don't think I've ever made a film before, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make a film again. But Clash from the Past was our most recent project. We worked on it with a million amazingly talented people, and I know your background is in documentary. It is a documentary. It's a documentary about a fake history, but it's a 22-minute absolute joy of a ride. Even if you don't care about Clash of Clans or video games, we had a really, really fun time making this. And yeah, I don't know if I'll have the opportunity to make a film uh, like that or a film in general in my career. So I was thinking about, what movies to recommend, and I just would love people to watch it because it was one of those moments where we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't know if we were talented enough to make something, and a lot of really amazing people came together and like made something genuinely wholesome and emotional. And there's a lot of stories within the story that I think people will love. So, Clash from the Past. Go ahead and Google it. So what was that? That was the film. But creative campaigns, there's two actually that I really love. One is really simple. It's a couple of films from Levi's, um, out of a competing agency. So I won't give them the joy of naming them, but they know who they are. Levi's, the greatest story ever worn. Amazing, amazing line. And a pretty simple insight. They just found real stories about Levi's for the 150th anniversary, but um, I don't know what it is about these films. It feels like, classic advertising that got me into it. They're just beautifully crafted. They're so simple. One's a story about how not only a lot of people have been asked to be buried in Levi's, but one person in particular asked everybody in attendance at his funeral to wear Levi's, which it's like such a fun way to talk about brand love. And people would have shied away from that script a million times. But the second campaign, I won't tell you about it because it's a visual delight. You just got to go look at it. But Nickelodeon came out and brought the Splat back. Big rebranding for Nickelodeon. That's one of my favorite brands of all time. One of my favorite creatives of all time worked on it. But go check out the Nickelodeon Splat work. It's amazing. So yeah, Nickelodeon Levi's would be my two campaigns.
Okay, very cool. Yeah.
Okay, and for the book, we will add everything in description. Yeah, so everyone that is listening can be
lazy
just click and
just click
get
on
acquainted.
links.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. That's good. Nobody wants to actually Google stuff, We can Google it for you. Books. Okay, so I've read more books in the last 2 months than I think I've ever read in my entire life. Because I don't read books. Like people who know me know I don't read books, and maybe that means I'm stupid, which I know I am. I don't. I have a lizard brain, but no, I haven't read a lot of books. I don't like reading books. I have a really hard time taking information in by reading it. I'm a visual person, and I don't have ADD or dyslexia that I know of. But when I read, I find myself, I'll be reading the same paragraph for the fifth time, and then I'll realize that I've just read the same paragraph 5 times and I didn't take anything in. But I've read 1,000 books in the last 2 months because of my daughter, and I've been reading kids' books. I've read a million of these kids' books, and they're fascinating to me because um, the idea of like writing something for a kid, but the parents are going to be the one reading it. It's a really interesting dichotomy to write in kids' language, but in a way that parents can also appreciate. Pixar is sort of like the master at that. But this book in particular, it's called My New Human. I have no investment in this. I don't know who these people are. Kelsey Summer was the writer, and Lana Lee is the illustrator. It's about a dog, and it's told from the dog's perspective, and how the dog experienced um, having a new baby enter the family. And it made me cry. It's like 7 pages, maybe 7 words on each of those 7 pages. And it was just incredible. These kids' books, they have like lyrical quality, they have rhythm, they have depth of story, simplicity. Uh, the illustrations are unique every time. And even though I'm reading it to my daughter, like I can tell that they put jokes in there for me.
It's a
So
perfect
yeah, I don't know.
advertising
Kids'
campaign.
books are sort of my new frontier. That it is. Yeah, it really is. It's like the new frontier that I have to conquer because I find them like so brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, and as not a reader, I like reading them.
Well, you found books for you. Finally.
Yeah, that's the thing. I still read at a 5-month-old
No,
level.
I completely agree on children's books. They're so brilliant. Some of the books made me cry as well. And actually, for the first time in my life, I wrote an email to I found the email of the author or the agency they're at, and actually wrote an email to them saying, the illustrations are beautiful, the storytelling is so cool. It brought me so much joy reading your book with my child. I actually did that. It was the only time in my life when I was so moved by something that I actually took an effort to find the person's address and tell them.
It's incredible, and they did it with 50 words. It's really amazing.
Nick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. And I'm really we are looking forward to part 2. So I think we can pencil that for, like, I don't know, maybe in some time. And we can return to the conversation on everything being created and how to deal with it. I think this could be a good teaser for a part 2. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, incredible. Part 2, the first 24-hour long podcast. We'll talk forever about that. But yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. It'll be less fun listening to myself talk when I review this, but hopefully there are some good tidbits for your audience. Yeah,
So
thank you
yeah,
both so much. It was awesome to meet you, and this was a really fun chat.
Thank you,
very
Nick.
much.
So thank you everyone for listening. And if you hear this right now, it means that you've listened to our whole conversation with Nick Howard. And I'm sure that you enjoyed it as much as we did. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you.